The heavy scent of pine sap and crushed iron hung thick in the frozen air of the gorge. Down below, the trap had done exactly what the math dictated it would. The massive avalanche of pine logs had sheared through the narrow pass, burying Silas's scouting party under tons of timber, shattered stone, and hard-packed snow. 7 of them, Chief Bran muttered, his heavy boots crunching into the blood-stained slush. He kicked a crushed iron spalter protruding from a log pile. All dead. The gorge turned them into a meat grinder, Your Highness. I've lived in these mountains for 40 years, and I've never seen a slope weaponized like that. It's simple physics, Bran, I said, my voice completely flat as I stepped down the rocky incline. Mass times acceleration. If you control the incline, you control the velocity. I didn't look at the bodies. I didn't care about the lives taken. In a war of survival, sympathy was a resource I couldn't afford to waste. Right now, I needed raw materials. Finch, open the ledger, I commanded. Master Finch scrambled down behind me, his fingers trembling as he fumbled with his inkwell and charcoal. My lord, we shouldn't linger here. If Silas's main camp doesn't receive a report from these scouts by tomorrow morning, they will send a full war band. Which is exactly why we aren't leaving a single scrap behind, I interrupted, kneeling next to a shattered horse corpse. I unbuckled a reinforced steel breastplate from a fallen rider. The village keep has no iron reserves. The gates are rusted open. We strip everything. Every sword, every dagger, every link of chainmail, and every iron horseshoe. We don't have a forge yet, but we have enough scrap here to fortify our primary choke points. Bran stared at me, his grip tightening on his broadaxe. The skepticism in his eyes was slowly being replaced by something else. Respect, or maybe a healthy dose of fear. You heard the prince, Bran roared, turning back toward the 5 shivering villagers who had followed us down. Stop staring at the blood and start unbuckling. Every piece of metal goes into the sleds. Move! As the men scrambled to strip the wreckage, I walked toward the edge of the clearing, tracking the deep boot prints the raiders had left before the avalanche hit. Silas wasn't just sending random thugs. These scouts were heavily armored, well-fed, and coordinated. They were treating Ashenvale like a target ripe for harvest. I picked up a dropped leather satchel, ripping it open. Inside wasn't food or coin. It was a crude, handwritten map of the valley, with a heavy ink circle drawn directly over our dilapidated well. They knew our water source was failing. They weren't just planning a raid. They were planning a siege to starve us out. I folded the map and slid it into my coat. Bran, pack the sleds. We have exactly 36 hours before the main force realizes these men are dead. We need to go back up to the keep and turn this iron into a defensive grid. By noon the following day, the village of Ashenvale didn't look like a graveyard anymore. It looked like a construction site. The successful ambush in the gorge had done something to the locals. The dead, defeated look in their eyes had been replaced by a quiet, frantic energy. They weren't just working to survive anymore. They were working because they finally believed they could. The final joint is secure, my lord, Chief Bran reported. The old warrior was drenched in sweat despite the freezing air, his hands covered in sticky pine sap and dark mud. He stood at the base of the crumbling keep's courtyard, where the end of our massive, interlocking wooden trough emptied into a deep, freshly cleared stone basin. The timber channel snaked all the way up the jagged cliffside, clinging to the stone face like a wooden spine. I stood on the lower steps of the keep, looking up at the high ridge. And the intake valve at the upper glacier runoff? Master Finch and 2 guards are holding the release lever at the reservoir now, Bran said, wiping his brow. He looked up at the empty wooden channel, then back at me, a lingering trace of doubt still flickering in his eyes. We did exactly as you sketched out, Prince. The angles are true. The joints are sealed with tallow and charcoal ash to keep them watertight. But if the water moves too slow, if it pools in the dips, it won't pool, I said calmly. The descent angle is a steady 15 degrees. At that incline, velocity overrides the freezing point. The liquid state is maintained through kinetic friction. Bran blinked, clearly not understanding the words, but he nodded anyway. Should I give the signal? I nodded. Give the word. Bran stepped to the center of the courtyard, cupped his hands around his mouth, and let out a sharp, piercing whistle that echoed off the canyon walls. High above, on the white rim of the ridge, a tiny red flag waved in response. For a long, tense minute, nothing happened. The only sound was the howling of the mountain wind. The villagers gathered around the perimeter of the courtyard, holding their breath, their eyes glued to the empty wooden troughs. A few of the older men shook their heads, muttering under their breath about royal fools wasting the village's last ounce of strength. Then came the rumble. It started as a low, vibrating hum deep within the cliffside, rapidly escalating into a heavy, rushing roar. "Look!" a young girl pointed, her voice cracking with excitement. At the very top of the ridge, a frothing, violent white crest of water burst into the upper channel. It plummeted downward, riding the wooden tracks like a wild beast. It slammed around the first banked turn, threw up a spray of glittering ice crystals, and accelerated down the main straightaway. It moved with terrifying speed, a continuous roaring ribbon of liquid glass cutting through the frozen gray landscape. Seconds later, a massive, pressurized torrent of crystal-clear water erupted from the final trough, slamming into the bottom of the stone basin with a deafening crash. The spray soaked the front of my cloak, but I didn't step back. The courtyard went dead silent for a heartbeat. Then, chaos broke out. The villagers didn't just cheer, they surged forward like desperate animals. They fell to their knees around the stone basin, plunging their cracked, dirt-stained hands into the rushing water. Women wept openly, splashing the clean, unfrozen liquid onto their faces. Men laughed like maniacs, filling wooden buckets and drinking until they gasped for air. Chief Bran stood frozen near the basin, his large hand hovering just inches above the rushing torrent. He lowered his fingers into the stream, feeling the raw, powerful force of the current. He looked up at me, his face a mask of absolute disbelief. It's warm," he whispered, his voice shaking. "It's not frozen. It's actually flowing. It's not warm, Bran. It's just moving," I said, walking down the steps toward him. "And as long as it keeps moving, Ashenvale has a pulse. Now, call the village together. We've solved our thirst. Tomorrow, we solve our hunger."